The situation constitutes a public health emergency of international concern.
Are we about to face another pandemic? We cannot deny that this scares us, especially after everything we experienced in 2020. Everyone knows how devastating the virus was at that time, and not just the virus itself, but also its consequences for the world. Many people warn that what we went through in 2020 was just a rehearsal, a way for authorities to test how far they can control the public in the name of public safety. Recently, the Director General of the World Health Organization issued a warning about a disease called MPox and the terrible consequences it could have worldwide. What everyone is wondering now is, are we close to experiencing a new pandemic? Could it have been predicted? At a press conference in Geneva, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, highlighted that MPX outbreaks have been reported in the Democratic Republic of Congo for more than a decade, and that infections have increased over the past few years. The World Health Organization has been working to contain MPX outbreaks in Africa and warning that the scenario is something that should concern us all. Last week, I convened the Emergency Committee to assess the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and other countries in Africa. Today, the committee met and reported that, in its view, the situation constitutes a public health emergency of international importance. I accepted the committee's recommendation. The detection and rapid spread of a new variant of MPX in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the detection of this same variant in neighboring countries that have not previously reported cases of the disease, and the potential for spread across Africa and beyond are very concerning, said Tedros. It is clear that a coordinated international response is essential to stop these outbreaks and save lives. A public health emergency of international importance is the highest level of alarm in health legislation, he concluded. You can find this statement on the Agência Brasil website. At this point, the question arises, could Nostradamus have predicted a new pandemic? In one of the excerpts from his book, he says the following: "The great plague of the maritime city will not cease until there is blood revenge, justice done by the pure blood of the ancient lady's culprits, the fall of her high city walls." It is important to remember that MPX has been around for many years, but concern about the significant increase in cases has recently put the world on alert. Nostradamus' prophecy talks about a great plague that spreads through a maritime city, generating a lot of curiosity and different interpretations over the years. Although MPX did not specifically originate in a coastal city, this connection to busy areas can still be analyzed within the modern context. Maritime cities, which in the past were centers of commerce and movement of people, continue to play a crucial role in the spread of diseases. But now we can expand this idea to global cities which, due to the high flow of international travel and exchanges, are points of entry and spread of epidemics. In the case of MPox, the disease quickly spread in densely populated and well-connected cities. Large metropolises, such as other urban areas, were particularly affected due to the number of people moving around and the speed at which the virus can spread in crowded environments. This behavior of the disease makes an interesting parallel with the idea of a maritime city mentioned in the prophecy, since, in the time of Nostradamus, port cities were the main centers of commerce and connection between different parts of the world, very similar to the modern cities that today play this role. The interpretation of the Great Plague also reflects how, in the current era, large urban centers have become vulnerable to the spread of disease due to globalization. Rapid transportation and the constant movement of people make it easier for a virus to spread on a global scale. The speed with which MPox spread is a clear example of this, showing that a disease that starts in a specific region can quickly become a global problem, affecting many nations in a matter of weeks. Another interesting point is that the prophecy mentions the persistence of the plague until something is done to correct or avenge the situation. This part can be interpreted as the delay in containing the MPox outbreak between 2022 and 2023 until appropriate measures were taken, such as the implementation of vaccination and awareness campaigns. Initially, the response was slow, with many countries underestimating the potential for the disease to spread. Only after a more coordinated global mobilization was it possible to begin to control the situation. In the context of modern cities, it is important to note that although the maritime environment is no longer the only vector of risk, the connection between different locations through trade, travel, and tourism remains a determining factor in the spread of disease. Today's maritime cities can be interpreted as any large global city that functions as a connection for people and goods. These locations are critical points in the disease transmission chain, and this is evident in the case of MPox. We can understand that the reference to a maritime city does not need to be interpreted literally. Instead, it can be seen as a symbol of the densely connected and heavily trafficked areas of the modern world, where diseases are more likely to spread, reinforcing the relevance of the prophecy even in modern times. So that you can more quickly and easily understand all the signs around us, in difficult times like the ones we are living in, it is crucial to be aware of the prophecies that are being fulfilled. Many still don't realize what is happening in the world, and that's why I decided to offer a special gift to all channel subscribers, an exclusive digital ebook entitled The Secret Behind the Holy Bible. In this book, you will find impactful revelations about biblical prophecies that will surprise you. Don't miss this unique opportunity to gain valuable knowledge. Downloading is simple and immediate. Just click on the link available in the first pinned comment. Remember, we only have a few units available and they are selling out quickly. Don't leave it for later, as the ebook will soon be taken down. Enjoy now and guarantee your gift. Nostradamus' prophecy talks about blood revenge in relation to the plague, which leaves room for various interpretations. This phrase suggests the idea of retribution or justice, as if the plague were a response to human actions or an imbalance in society. When we think about MPX, we can apply this idea in a symbolic way, considering that the emergence of diseases is often linked to human behavior, such as environmental degradation, inadequate sanitary practices, or even the way we interact with the world around us. In the case of MPox, the disease initially affected specific communities in Africa before spreading to several countries between 2022 and 2023, and now puts the whole world on alert again. This targeted spread, which began concentrated in certain groups, can be seen as a kind of symbolic revenge, where a trigger leads to a response that becomes a global problem. Often, diseases that emerge in vulnerable or neglected communities end up revealing flaws in health systems and the way these communities are treated. The lack of health control, ineffective policies, or even the marginalization of certain groups contribute to the spread of diseases, which can be interpreted as revenge from nature or society itself. The quote of blood vengeance in the prophecy can also be seen as a reference to the way certain diseases spread quickly and violently without discrimination. In the case of MPox, there was a time when the disease was associated with specific groups, which generated stigmatization and prejudice. However, the disease quickly surpassed these barriers, reaching people in different contexts and regions, showing that no group was truly immune. This reflects the idea that when a disease emerges, it can spread like uncontrolled retribution, affecting everyone. Another point to consider is the concept of imbalance in nature. New diseases often emerge as a result of environmental exploitation, deforestation, or increasingly frequent contact with wild animals, as was the case with the origin of several pandemics. These human actions create an environment conducive to the emergence of diseases, and we can interpret this as nature's response to humanity's irresponsible behavior. Blood revenge can therefore be seen as a metaphor for the way these actions come back to haunt us, manifesting in the form of plagues and pandemics. Furthermore, the expression blood revenge can symbolize the difficulty of containing the spread of a disease once it gains strength. The lack of preparation and late response allowed MPox to spread, which can be understood as a kind of retribution for the authorities' negligence in treating the situation with the necessary seriousness from the beginning. Thus, the revenge mentioned by Nostradamus can be seen as the price we pay for not being prepared to deal with new outbreaks. The relationship between the plague and blood revenge in Nostradamus' prophecy can be understood as a metaphor for the cycle of action and consequence that we see in the emergence of diseases like MPX. Whether due to environmental degradation, the marginalization of communities, or the lack of health control, this revenge can be interpreted as the return of the consequences of these actions in an unforeseen and, at times, devastating way. Nostradamus' prophecy mentions justice served by the pure blood of the guilty, which raises questions about how, during disease outbreaks, society often seeks to hold certain groups or individuals responsible for the origin or spread of the problem. In the case of MPX, we saw something similar happen when the disease began to spread. Some groups, specific communities, were stigmatized, and there was a misperception that only these communities were responsible for the spread. This behavior of looking for blame is common in times of crisis, when people look for explanations for what is happening. In the case of MPox, the disease was initially associated with certain populations, generating a wave of misinformation and prejudice. Instead of focusing on understanding and combating the problem broadly, society often tends to label and blame vulnerable groups, which historically only increases the problem and makes combating the disease more difficult. The expression "pure blood" of culprits may symbolize this attempt to find a pure or clear origin for the disease, as if identifying a specific culprit brings a sense of justice or control over the situation. However, this approach ignores the complexity of pandemics, which do not follow social boundaries. MPX showed that the disease can spread indiscriminately, affecting different communities regardless of their origin or behavior. This reveals that the search for culprits is, in fact, a simplistic and dangerous reaction that diverts attention from true solutions, such as health education, vaccination, and awareness. Furthermore, the idea of justice in the context of a disease can be distorted by the way certain responses to the outbreak are shaped. In the case of MPox, some initial measures were targeted only at specific groups, reinforcing the perception of blame and further isolating these communities. This approach creates divisions and increases mistrust rather than promoting a unified and effective response. It's a reminder of how easily public health crises can be turned into battles of moral justice, where a focus on blame overrides the true need for cooperation and solidarity. The prophecy also mentions the idea that this justice would only be achieved through punishment or retribution for the suffering caused, which may reflect the way some people believe that specific groups should suffer the consequences for supposedly being guilty. However, the case of MPX demonstrates that this mentality not only fails to solve the problem, but also worsens inequalities and creates new barriers to controlling the disease. Instead of looking for blame, it is more productive to recognize that pandemics are global problems that require collaboration between all sectors of society. The expression "pure blood of culprits" can be seen as a metaphor for the unfair search for culprits during health crises. The MPox story teaches us that stigmatizing specific communities is not only incorrect, but harmful. Instead of focusing on blame, it is essential to direct our efforts towards disseminating correct information, protecting everyone, and effectively combating the spread of the disease, recognizing that no one is immune to the impacts of a global pandemic. Nostradamus' prophecy mentions the ancient lady and her fall, which can be interpreted symbolically as the failure of a social structure or a health system in the face of a major crisis. In the context of MPX, this image of the old lady may represent the old ways of dealing with disease outbreaks, which in many cases were not enough to control the spread. The drop in this figure suggests the collapse or exposure of the weaknesses of systems that were supposed to protect the population, but ended up failing in several aspects. Between 2022 and 2023, when MPox began to spread, many countries faced significant challenges in containing the disease. Despite the technological and medical advances we have today, initial responses to the outbreak revealed serious deficiencies in health systems and public policies in many places. Authorities underestimated the severity of the situation or were slow to act, which allowed the virus to spread further. This can be seen as the fall of the old lady, a system that, although well established, proved inadequate to deal with an emerging crisis. The ancient lady can also symbolize the trust that society places in old structures, such as the belief that existing institutions will always be able to face any new threat. However, MPX explained that this confidence is not always justified. Even with decades of experience in dealing with pandemics, many countries were not prepared to face this new disease, especially in terms of rapid response, effective communication, and resource management. The fall of the old lady suggests that what worked in the past may not be enough for modern challenges. Furthermore, this fall can be seen as the collapse of an illusion of security. The pandemic we faced in 2020 had already shown the world how quickly even the most developed healthcare systems can be overwhelmed. MPX, although on a smaller scale, reinforced this reality. Systems that should be robust and adaptable have proven fragile when faced with a new threat. This breakdown of the old lady suggests that facing the health crises of the future requires more than simply relying on old methods. Innovation, agility, and a more integrated approach are needed, which takes into account the global nature of threats. Another important point is that the old lady may represent the resistance of traditional structures to evolve. Many health systems and public policies still operate based on concepts that do not keep up with rapid changes in society and the world. This resistance to change can be one of the factors that lead to the collapse of these structures when faced with something new and unexpected. In the case of MPX, the delayed response and lack of efficient global coordination showed that there is still much room for improvement in the way we deal with disease outbreaks. The ancient lady mentioned in the prophecy can be seen as a symbol of the old and obsolete structures that failed to contain the MPX effectively. Its fall represents the need to rethink and modernize healthcare systems and crisis responses, ensuring they are ready to face new challenges in the future. The lesson we learn from this is that we cannot cling to what worked in the past. We must be willing to continually evolve and adapt to better protect the population in times of crisis. Nostradamus' prophecy also mentions the high city walls and their fall, which can be understood as a metaphor for the barriers and protections that nations create to protect themselves against disease. In the modern context, these high walls can represent public health policies such as quarantines, vaccination campaigns, and outbreak control measures. However, the spread of MPox revealed that, even with these protections, barriers can fail, exposing the vulnerability of systems and generating the need to reevaluate these strategies. When we talk about walls in a symbolic sense, we are referring to the preventative and containment measures that governments implement to prevent a disease from spreading. In many situations, these policies serve as effective barriers, as we have seen in previous outbreaks. However, in the case of MPX, there were a series of failures that allowed the disease to spread beyond the initially affected borders. These flaws can be seen as gaps in the walls, allowing the plague to infiltrate populations despite containment efforts. One of the factors that contributed to the fall of these walls was the slow and, in some cases, ineffective response from certain authorities. At first, MPX was underestimated, being treated as an isolated problem, which resulted in inadequate preventive actions. This allowed the virus to spread before stricter measures were implemented. Even when quarantines and restrictions were imposed, it was too late to stop the spread of the disease in some regions. This situation highlights how, in times of crisis, the effectiveness of walls depends not only on their existence, but also on how quickly and in a coordinated way they are erected. The collapse of these walls can also be interpreted as a temporary collapse in the ability of nations to control a disease outbreak. MPX revealed that, even with advances in medicine and science, societies are still vulnerable to new threats. This highlights the need for continuous review and adaptation of health systems. Many of the measures that worked in the past are no longer sufficient in a globalized world, where diseases can spread quickly from one region to another. Breaking down these barriers serves as a warning about the importance of a more integrated and proactive approach to public health. Furthermore, The idea of high walls falling can also symbolize the social and psychological impact of a disease that spreads despite protections. People's trust in health systems and authorities can be shaken when they see that measures promised to protect them are not effective. This type of collapse may not be permanent, but it generates distrust and uncertainty, which can hamper future responses to crises. The fall of the walls, in this sense, represents not only the failure of physical or political barriers, but also the breakdown of society's trust in its institutions. The high city walls mentioned in Nostradamus' prophecy can be interpreted as policies and systems of protection against diseases. MPX's action showed that these walls can fail when the response is not fast or coordinated enough. The fall of these barriers serves as a reminder of the constant need to review, update, and strengthen public health strategies to ensure they are prepared to face future challenges. The world has changed, and the walls that were once sufficient now need to be more robust and flexible to deal with the threats that the future may bring. Nostradamus talks about a plague that hits suddenly, something that can be interpreted as the unexpected nature of epidemics. This idea is very relevant in the context of MPX, as the rapid and unexpected spread of this virus surprised many people and health authorities. The MPX outbreak is a clear example of how diseases can emerge suddenly, spread quickly, and become a global health problem, even when expectations indicated the risk was low. In the case of MPX, the disease was initially restricted to a few specific regions and was considered rare, with few cases recorded outside Africa. However, in 2022, the virus began to spread unexpectedly in several countries, including nations where the disease was not common. This sudden outbreak showed that even diseases that seemed to be under control can resurface and become a global threat in a short time. This unexpected nature of epidemics highlights the uncertainty of how, where, and when a new disease may appear. History shows us that epidemics often emerge without warning, catching both the population and health systems off guard. In the case of MPX, a lack of initial preparedness allowed the virus to spread before authorities could react effectively, and this reinforces the need for constant global surveillance, where emerging diseases are closely monitored so they can be controlled sooner. Become major crises. The unpredictable nature of epidemics also highlights how the modern world, with all its technology and medical advances, is still vulnerable to unexpected outbreaks. Even with developed health systems, the movement of people, goods, and animals on a global scale facilitates the spread of diseases. This means that a local outbreak can quickly turn into an international problem. MPX illustrates this dynamic well, as, within a few weeks, cases began to appear in various parts of the world in an apparently disconnected way, showing how unpredictable the behavior of a virus can be. Another important point is that this unpredictability creates challenges for both health authorities and the general population. When an outbreak happens unexpectedly, it is common for initial information to be confusing or insufficient, which makes it difficult to respond appropriately. The rapid spread of MPX caught many by surprise, leading to a race to understand the virus, its transmission, and how to control its spread. This process of quickly adapting to a new threat is crucial, but it can also be hampered by a lack of preparation and underestimation of the problem. The unexpected nature of epidemics, as prophesied by Nostradamus, is a reminder that in an increasingly interconnected world, vigilance and preparedness must be constant. Diseases do not follow a predictable pattern and can appear where you least expect them.